What if I told you that the most overwhelming emotion you felt today, that pang of anxiety in your chest, that wave of anger that rose in your throat, wasn't really yours? Carl Jung's psychology offers us a dizzying truth. Emotions are autonomous entities, almost like ancient gods that inhabit our unconscious. They are not reactions, they are actions. They are psychic forces with a will of their own, which sees us to deliver messages that our conscious mind is incapable of accepting. Think about it. Your anxiety is not a defect. It is an oracle trying to warn you about a path that betrays your soul. Your anger is not a sin. It is the energy of an inner guardian protecting a boundary that you refuse to set for yourself. We are living like puppets of forces we do not understand, and the key to our freedom is not to silence them, but to finally learn their language. This is not a journey for the faint of heart. What you are about to discover will shake the foundations of who you think you are. If you are ready to stop being a plaything of your own unconscious and become the master of your psychic reality, then this is your place. Subscribe to this channel as an active commitment to your own depth. Activate the bell so you don't miss a single step of this expedition into your soul. Leave a like if you felt the call to truth, and comment with the word journey so that I know you have crossed the portal and are ready for what comes next. What we will reveal in the next few minutes is the map that conventional psychology has hidden from you. Proceed at your own risk. We are born into a world that idolizes control, that teaches us from the cradle to tame the wild nature that dwells within us. The rational mind, the ego, is crowned as the sovereign king of our inner realm, and emotions are treated as primitive rebels that must be suppressed, managed, or, at best, tolerated. This is the great lie of modern civilization, a lie that sickens our souls. Carl Jung, with the courage of an explorer of abysses, showed us that the ego is not the king. It is, in fact, a small, frightened administrator of a tiny island floating on a vast, dark, and infinitely powerful ocean, the unconscious. And this ocean is not silent. It communicates through the tides, storms, and deep currents of our emotions. Every feeling that emerges from us is a direct emanation of this immensity. To believe that we control our emotions is as naive as a boatman believing he controls the ocean. We can, at most, learn to navigate, to read the winds and the stars, to respect the fury of the waves, but the real power will always belong to the depths. The anxiety that wakes you up at 3 in the morning is not a malfunction of your brain. It is the ocean crashing against the foundations of your island, warning that the structure you have built, your career, your relationship, your beliefs is on unstable ground, that it does not correspond to the truth of your soul. The sudden wave of melancholy on a sunny day is not depression. It is a deep current bringing to the surface the pain of a forgotten longing, of a part of yourself that has been exiled. To deny these voices is the supreme act of egoic arrogance. Repression does not make them disappear. It only forces them to manifest in darker, more distorted ways: physical symptoms, inexplicable compulsions, outbursts of self-destructive behavior. The real work is not to strengthen the island's walls, but to build a safe harbor, a place where the creatures of the abyss can emerge, be seen, heard, and understood. Individuation, the journey to become whole, begins with this act of humility, surrendering to the wisdom of the ocean, and accepting that the truest voice of your being does not speak the language of logic, but the universal and symbolic dialect of feeling. The shadow is our secret double, the dark cellar of our psyche where we lock away everything we consider unacceptable, ugly, and unworthy. It is home to our selfishness, our envy, our greed, and, above all, our repressed power. Like a locked vault, the shadow guards not only our demons, but also our most precious treasures, the vitality, creativity, authenticity, and passion that were sacrificed on the altar of social adaptation. And how does this vault communicate with us? Through its fiercest guardians: anger, fear, and sadness. Anger is perhaps the most misunderstood messenger. When it explodes, we feel shame, as if a beast has broken its cage. But anger, in its essence, is the life force defending itself. It is the cry of a boundary that has been crossed, the manifestation of the warrior archetype who refuses to be subjugated. Where there is repressed anger, there is a no that needs to be said, a truth that needs to be defended. The gold in anger is your dignity, your personal sovereignty. To ignore it is to allow the world to invade and diminish you until there is nothing left. Fear, in turn, is the guardian of the unknown. It arises at the exact border between who we are and who we can become. It is not a signal to retreat, but a call to prepare. Fear points to the area of your life where your soul yearns for expansion. If you are afraid of public speaking, it is because your authentic voice is trapped, waiting to be released. If you are afraid of intimacy, it is because your heart longs for a true connection, but fears the vulnerability it requires. The gold in fear is your unrealized potential. To flee from it is to condemn yourself to live in a prison of stagnant familiarity. Sadness is the alchemist of the soul. It is the necessary rain that dissolves the old so that the new can sprout. Sadness visits us when something needs to die within us, a belief, a relationship, an identity. It forces us to go down, to be still, to feel the weight of loss. In a world that demands constant happiness, sadness is an act of sacred rebellion. The gold in sadness is depth, compassion, and resilience. It is through sadness that the heart becomes vaster, capable of holding more life, more love, and more truth. Confronting these three messengers is not an act of masochism, but of supreme courage. It is the work of the hero, who descends into the underworld not to fight the monsters, but to rescue the treasures they guard. In our exploration of the depths, it is easy to get lost in the darkness, believing that psychological work is merely a confrontation with pain. But the unconscious does not only guide us through storms, it also points the way through sunlight. Genuine joy, overwhelming passion, and that feeling of vibrant enthusiasm are not mere superficial pleasures or distractions. They are, in fact, the clearest and most direct signals from the self, our ordering center, indicating that we are aligned with our life's purpose, with our entelechy. Individuation, the journey to wholeness, is not a path of perpetual suffering, but a quest for alignment with this central force. When you are engaged in an activity and lose track of time, when you feel a wave of energy and vitality that seems to spring from an inexhaustible source, you are touching your daemon, your inner genius. This is what Jung would call an unmistakable sign from the self. Society, with its pragmatic demands, often teaches us to distrust these states. Passion is seen as reckless, joy as childish. We are encouraged to follow the safe path, the stable job, the predictable life, even if it means the slow death of our soul. The result is an epidemic of existential emptiness, of people who have everything but feel nothing. The soul's compass, however, is relentless. It will continue to point to your true north, even if you try to ignore it. That hobby you abandoned, but which still haunts your thoughts. That childhood dream you ridicule as naive. That subject that makes you read for hours on end, forgetting the world. These are not whims. They are breadcrumbs left by yourself in the dark forest of adulthood. Following them is the most courageous act one can commit. It requires faith to trade the security of the known for the uncertainty of passion. It requires challenging the internal and external voices of cynicism and doubt. But every step taken in the direction of what brings you genuine joy is a step toward integration. It is an act of rescuing your divine child, the archetype of spontaneity, wonder, and unlimited potential. Therefore, pay attention. Where in your life do you feel this vibration? What makes your heart sing, even if your mind calls you a fool? This is not an escape from reality. It is the map to your deepest reality, the way back home, to the center of yourself. An emotion is like a wave in the ocean of the psyche. It arises, reaches its peak, and dissipates. A complex, however, is a whirlpool. It is what happens when an emotion fails to complete its cycle. Due to trauma, constant repression, or a deep wound, the emotional energy gets trapped, beginning to spin around an archetypal core like water draining down a sink. This whirlpool takes on a life of its own, becoming an autonomous subpersonality within our psyche. It has its own memories, its own triggers, and its own agenda. Jung said that everyone knows that complexes can have us. That is the key. It is not we who have a complex. It is the complex that has us. When we are under the sway of a complex, our ego is hijacked. We lose the ability to choose and react in a disproportionate and compulsive way. Think of the inferiority complex. It is not just a negative thought. It is an entity that filters reality. A compliment becomes proof that the person is being ironic. A silence becomes confirmation of our insignificance. The power complex, on the other hand, will cause a person to seek control and dominance in all situations, driven by an unconscious fear of helplessness. The danger of complexes is their invisibility to the one under their spell. The person believes their reaction is justified, that anyone would have acted the same way. They do not realize they are being manipulated by an internal force, reliving the same emotional pattern repeatedly, like a broken record. This is the person who always falls in love with the same type of unavailable partner, who always sabotages their own success just as they are about to achieve it, who explodes with rage for trivial reasons. These are not character flaws, they are manifestations of active complexes. The work of individuation requires us to become detectives of our own soul, hunters of complexes. The first step is non-judgmental self-observation. When an intense and disproportionate emotional reaction occurs, instead of identifying with it, ask, who is speaking now? What part of me has been activated? Bringing the light of consciousness to the complex is the beginning of the process of freeing it. It is not about destroying the complex, for it contains precious vital energy that has been trapped. It is about disarming it, understanding the original pain that created it, and integrating that energy back into the conscious ego. By doing so, the whirlpool calms, and the energy that once imprisoned you becomes fuel for a more conscious and free life. Within every man dwells an inner feminine figure, the anima. Within every woman, an inner masculine figure, the animus. These are not abstract concepts but living archetypes, bridges to the collective unconscious that profoundly shape our emotional and relational lives. The anima in a man represents his feeling side, his capacity for relatedness, his intuition, and his connection to the soul. The animus in a woman represents her rational side, her capacity for assertiveness, her focus, and her logos. The quality of our relationship with this inner figure determines the quality of our external relationships and our emotional maturity. A man who has not integrated his anima, who has repressed it for fear of appearing weak or feminine, will be ruled by it from the shadow. His emotions will be childish and temperamental. He will be susceptible to inexplicable moods, and most importantly, he will project his undeveloped anima onto the women in his life. He will seek in his partner the soul he cannot find in himself, demanding that she be his muse, his mother, his savior, an impossible task that dooms the relationship to failure. Likewise, a woman who has not integrated her animus will be dominated by it. Her thinking will become rigid, dogmatic, and overly critical. She will not have opinions, the opinions will have her. She will project her negative animus onto men, seeing them as oppressors or authority figures to be challenged, unable to relate to them as equals. Emotions are the main battlefield and meeting ground for these figures. When a man feels a wave of tenderness or vulnerability, it is an invitation from his anima for dialogue. If he rejects it, she becomes bitter and vengeful. When a woman feels an impulse to speak her truth with clarity and authority, it is her positive animus manifesting. If she represses it for fear of being judged, he becomes a cruel inner critic. The phenomenon of love at first sight is often a massive projection of the anima or animus. We fall in love not with the real person, but with the image of our soul we see reflected in them. The work of integration consists of withdrawing these projections, of recognizing that the qualities we so admire or detest in the other are, in fact, aspects of our own psyche. It is a painful but liberating process. By developing a conscious dialogue with our anima or animus, we begin to relate to others from a place of wholeness, not of need. The man finds his own soul, and the woman her own voice, and only then does a true relationship, a union of two whole individuals, become possible. The ancient alchemists were not just trying to turn metals in dusty laboratories. Their work, the opus magnum, was a profound metaphor for the process of psychological transformation, for the journey of individuation. They spoke of transforming the prima materia, the chaotic and despised raw material, into the lapis philosophorum, the philosopher's stone, a symbol of the self of wholeness. In our inner journey, the prima materia is our most difficult, darkest, and most painful emotions. It is the heavy lead of our anguish, our resentment, our despair. Society teaches us to get rid of this lead as quickly as possible. to hide it under the rug of toxic positivity. Jungian alchemy, however, invites us to do the opposite, to place this lead at the center of our inner laboratory. The alchemical process begins with calcinatio, the burning. It is the confrontation with the fury of our pain, allowing the fire of emotion to burn away our false identities and defenses. It is a process of purification through pain, of letting everything that is not essential burn. Next comes solutio, the dissolution. It is the plunge into the waters of sadness, allowing the rigid structures of our ego to dissolve. It is the moment of surrender, of weeping, of yielding to what is. Then coagulatio, coagulation. From the ashes and water, something new begins to take shape. It is the moment of giving new meaning to our pain, of finding wisdom in suffering, of building a new, more resilient and authentic identity. And finally, sublimatio, sublimation, where what was heavy and earthly is elevated to a higher plane. Personal pain is transformed into universal compassion. The wound becomes a source of healing, not only for ourselves but for others. This process requires a hermetically sealed vessel, the vas hermeticum. This vessel is our capacity to contain emotional tension without exploding and without repressing. It is the ability to stay with the discomfort, to endure the heat of the alchemical fire. It is what the poet John Keats called negative capability, the ability to remain in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without an irritable reaching after fact and reason. Every time you choose to feel a difficult emotion instead of running from it, you are practicing inner alchemy. You are honoring your prima materia and allowing the transformative process to unfold. You are turning the lead of your personal biography into the gold of impersonal consciousness, the philosopher's stone that is your own soul, whole and radiant. Dreams are the letters the self sends us every night. They are telegrams from the unconscious, written in an archaic and symbolic language that our rational mind dismisses as illogical. However, for Jung, dreams are the royal road to the knowledge of our inner world, and the key to deciphering their code lies not in logic, but in feeling. Every dream has a specific emotional atmosphere. The first step to understanding a dream is not to ask what does it mean, but rather how did I feel in it? Was I being chased? I felt panic. Was I flying? I felt exhilaration. Did I find a treasure? I felt awe. The emotional landscape of the dream is the context that gives meaning to the symbols. The same symbol, like a snake, can have completely different meanings depending on the feeling associated with it. A snake that inspires terror might represent an instinctual fear or a venomous threat in your life. A snake that guides and inspires reverence might symbolize healing, renewal, and wisdom, like the caduceus of Hermes. Therefore, feeling is Ariadne's thread that guides us through the labyrinth of the dream. Furthermore, dreams have a compensatory function. They bring to the surface what is being neglected in our conscious life. If you are an excessively controlling and logical person, you might dream that you are lost in a magical forest, feeling confused and amazed. The dream is trying to compensate for your one-sided attitude, inviting you to embrace mystery and intuition. If you repress your anger in waking life, you may have violent dreams where you commit terrible acts. The dream is not saying you are a murderer. It is dramatizing the aggressive energy that you refuse to acknowledge, showing how dangerous it can become when ignored. How we react emotionally to the figures in the dream is also crucial. The dark figure chasing you in the dream may be a part of yourself that you reject. Your fear of it in the dream reflects your fear of confronting that aspect in yourself. Working with dreams is an ongoing dialogue. Upon waking, write down the dream and, more importantly, the emotions it evoked. Meditate on them. Amplify the symbols, associating them with myths, fairy tales, and your own personal life. By doing this, you are building a bridge between the ego and the self. You are learning the native language of your soul, and slowly, the nightly letters will cease to be indecipherable messages and will become a reliable and profound guide on your journey of individuation. Repression is the ego's fundamental defense mechanism. It is the act of forcefully pushing into the cellar of the unconscious any thought, feeling, or impulse that is considered threatening, painful, or socially unacceptable. It is an act of self-deception that, in the short term, may seem effective, bringing a sense of relief and control. In the long term, however, it is a recipe for psychological disaster. What is repressed does not disappear. On the contrary, the psychic energy contained in the repressed content begins to ferment in the darkness, gaining power and autonomy. A repressed emotion becomes the seed of a complex. A denied impulse manifests as a neurotic symptom. As Jung stated, what you resist persists. The energy has to go somewhere. Anger that cannot be expressed may turn inward, manifesting as depression or autoimmune disease. A sexual desire judged as sinful may emerge in obsessive fantasies or compulsive acts. Sadness that is not mourned can turn into a chronic, free-floating anxiety, a nameless fear that hangs over one's life. One of the most common fates of repressed material is projection. Because the ego cannot tolerate a certain aspect in itself, it sees it in others. The person who represses their own aggressiveness will see the world as a dangerous and hostile place. The person who denies their own dishonesty will become cynical, convinced that everyone is trying to deceive them. Projection is the root cause of countless interpersonal conflicts, prejudices, and even wars. We fight fiercely against our own shadow reflected in the face of the other. The hijacking of life by repression can be subtle. It can manifest as a loss of vitality, a feeling of unreality. As if the person is just playing a role, life loses its color, its flavor, its spontaneity. This happens because, by repressing negative emotions, we inevitably also repress the positive ones. One cannot selectively anesthetize the soul. By closing the door to pain, we also close it to joy. The path to healing is not through more repression, but through the courageous act of remembering, of bringing back to consciousness what has been exiled. It is an archaeological work of excavating the ruins of our past, of giving voice to the parts of ourselves that have been silenced. It is painful, yes, but it is the only way to rescue the vital energy that is trapped in the unconscious, and to become whole again. Freedom is not in not feeling, but in having the capacity to feel everything. In Jung's psychological topology, feeling is one of the four fundamental functions of consciousness, alongside thinking, sensation, and intuition, and it is crucial to understand that, for Jung, feeling is not the same as emotion. Emotion is a storm, an involuntary affective reaction that can overwhelm us. Feeling, on the other hand, is a rational function of judgment, while the thinking function judges the world based on logic and objectivity, asking is this true or false. The feeling function judges the world based on values, asking is this good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant, do I accept or reject it? It is the compass that guides us in the world of relationships and values. A person with a well-developed feeling function possesses extraordinary relational intelligence. They can assess the atmosphere of a room, perceive the subtle emotional currents between people, and make decisions that promote harmony. Their judgment is not based on cold analysis, but on a deep appreciation of the relative value of things. They know what is important to themselves and to others. They do not ask what should I do, but rather what resonates with my heart, what is in harmony with my deepest values. In our culture, which overvalues logical and scientific thinking, the feeling function is often underdeveloped and misunderstood, especially in men. It is confused with sentimentality or irrationality. However, making an important decision like choosing a career or a partner based solely on the logic of thinking, ignoring the evaluation of feeling, is a recipe for a soulless life. The result is a life that is technically correct but emotionally empty. On the other hand, being dominated by raw emotions is also not using the feeling function. The person who explodes in anger or drowns in self-pity is not making a value judgment. They are being a victim of a complex. Developing the feeling function requires the ability to differentiate oneself from the emotion. It requires the ability to feel an intense emotion, anger, for example, and, instead of reacting blindly, use that energy to make a clear value judgment. The situation is violating a fundamental value of mine. Therefore, I reject it and will set a boundary. It is an active, conscious, and courageous process. Developing this function is essential for individuation. It is learning to navigate life not just with the map of logic, but also with the compass of the heart. It is the only way to build a life that is not only successful in the eyes of the world, but is deeply meaningful to the soul. We have reached the crucial point, the practical application of all this wisdom. How? In our daily lives, can we use our emotions as an oracle to guide us? The journey of life is a succession of crossroads, of small and large decisions that, taken together, weave our destiny. The rational mind, with its lists of pros and cons, is a useful but limited tool. It can analyze the past and project the future based on known data, but it has no access to the deeper wisdom of the self, which knows our potential and our true path. This access is gained through emotions. When we learn to listen to them as the voice of our inner oracle, integration begins with the practice of presence, or what we might call body listening. Emotions are not ideas, they are physical events. Anxiety tightens the chest, fear chills the stomach, joy expands the heart. Throughout the day, take breaks to connect with your body. Ask, what am I feeling now, physically? Without judgment, just observe. This is the first step in learning the language of the oracle. When faced with a decision, after you have done all the logical analysis possible, set aside a moment of silence. Visualize each option vividly. As you imagine path A, pay full attention to your body's reactions and your feelings. Do you feel a sense of expansion, of lightness, of resonance? Or do you feel a contraction, a heaviness, a sense that something is off? Repeat the process with path B. Your body's response is the oracle's answer. Often, the most authentic answer will not be the easiest or the most logical. It may be the one that scares you the most, because fear, as we have seen, points toward growth. It is crucial to differentiate the voice of the oracle from the voice of a complex. The voice of the complex is compulsive, reactive, loud, and usually accompanied by a feeling of urgency and panic. The voice of the oracle, the voice of the self, is quieter, calmer. It manifests as a feeling of inner certainty, of peace, of alignment. Even if the path ahead is difficult, it is the still, small voice of which the mystics speak. Integrating the oracle is an act of trust. It is trusting that there is a wisdom within you that is greater than your conscious mind. It requires the courage to act on a feeling, on an intuition, even when the outside world calls you crazy. But every time you honor this inner voice, you strengthen your connection with the self. You cease to be a leaf in the wind of circumstances and become the conscious co-creator of your own life, navigating the ocean of existence not with the fear of the ego, but with the confidence of the soul that knows the way back home.